was an old rifle and a wounded boy who couldn't stand without assistance. Then Ayanna did something that chilled Boon's blood. The boy moved a window and made a sound, low and haunting, like a night bird calling to its mate. 3 times he made the sound, then listened. From somewhere in the darkness beyond the house, an identical call returned. What was that? Boon demanded. Ayanna met his eyes, and for the first time since they'd met, the boy smiled. My father comes. Boon felt the blood drain from his face. Your father? Ayanna nodded, pressing his hand against in the fading daylight. He appeared no different from any other cattleman repairing his property boundaries. However, when gunfire echoed through the valley, Boon Cartwright couldn't have imagined that safeguarding a single Apache child would result in 40 braves arriving at his doorstep before sunrise. The rifle reports originated from Miller's Creek's direction, cutting through the peaceful evening air with harsh intensity. Boon ceased his work on the fence post, his callous hands maintaining their grip on the barbed wire. These particular shots felt ominous, excessive in number, and fired in rapid succession, suggesting men pursuing prey they intended to eliminate. After wiping perspiration from his brow, he strained to listen. Only the wind rustling through sagebrush remained. Yet his intuition urged investigation, the same survival instinct that had preserved his life through 3 territorial conflicts and numerous solitary nights in this unforgiving terrain. Boon prepared his mount and headed toward the creek, following a path worn smooth by 15 years of livestock inspections. The setting sun bathed the rocks in crimson while creating elongated shadows capable of concealing anything or anyone. That's when he discovered the child, a small, dark-complexioned boy of perhaps 12 years, hiding behind a boulder beside the water. His torn garment was saturated with blood, and his dark eyes shifted nervously between Boon and the hills beyond, like a trapped creature calculating escape routes. Boon dismounted deliberately, keeping his hands visible and weaponless. The youngster was clearly Apache, and judging by his constant backward glances, those gunshots had targeted him specifically. Easy there, son, Boon said softly. You hurt bad. The boy's jaw clenched, but he remained motionless, likely unable to flee, given his condition. The blood stain on his shirt continued spreading, and his breathing came in shallow, labored gasps. Distant horses approached, accompanied by men's voices filled with malicious excitement, the type belonging to those who found entertainment in hunting the defenseless. They coming for you? Boon inquired. The boy nodded once, his small palm pressed against his injured ribs. Boon reached his decision instantly, as he had made every crucial choice in his 45 years, swiftly and decisively without hesitation. Can you ride? Another nod. Then we're getting out of here now. He assisted the boy onto his horse, noting how frail and lightweight he felt, like an injured bird. The child endured his pain silently, making no sound even when Boon lifted him into the saddle. They rode urgently toward Boone's property, the boy gripping the saddle horn, while Boon guided the horse on foot across rough terrain. Behind them, the voices grew louder and more frustrated. They had lost the trail. Boone's ranch house nestled in a natural hollow between 2 ridges, concealed from the main road and neighboring properties. He had constructed it this way intentionally, valuing solitude over accessibility. Tonight, that decision might preserve both their lives. Inside the dwelling, Boone illuminated a single lamp and assessed the boy's injury. A bullet had grazed his ribs, painful but not life-threatening if kept clean. He worked quietly, cleansing the wound with whiskey and wrapping it with strips from a fresh shirt. What's your name, son? Ayanna, the boy whispered his first spoken word. Well, Ayanna, you're safe here for now. But even as he spoke, Boone realized safety was a luxury neither could depend upon. His closest neighbors were the Miller brothers, who would shoot an Apache on sight purely from principle. And if word spread that he was sheltering an Indian child, the sound of approaching hoofbeats outside froze them both. Multiple horses moved slowly and methodically, searching. Boone extinguished the lamp and approached the window, peering through a curtain gap. 5 mounted men sat just beyond his gate, their faces obscured by shadow, but their intentions unmistakable. One called out, his voice carrying across the yard like a challenge. Cartwright, we know you're in there. We're looking for something that belongs to us. Boone immediately recognized the voice. Malachi Voss, the cruelest man in 3 counties, with a reputation for brutality extending far beyond livestock treatment. Behind him sat his brother Ezra, and 3 other men Boone didn't recognize, but their type was obvious enough. Drifters and troublemakers who would do anything for money and bloodshed. "Don't see how anything of yours would end up on my land, Voss," Boone responded through the closed door, "unless you're missing some cattle." Malachi's laughter was harsh and mirthless. "Cut the act, Cartwright. We tracked an Apache boy right to your fence line. Little Savage wounded one of my men before he ran." Boone glanced down at Ayanna, who had become completely still beside the window. The boy's dark eyes held no fear now, only cold comprehension that his life depended on whatever transpired in the next few minutes. "Lot of tracks out there," Boone said. "Could have gone anywhere after that. Could have, but didn't." Ezra Voss spoke up, his voice thinner than his brother's, but twice as cruel. "Saw you riding back from Miller's Creek not an hour ago. Mighty convenient timing." Boone's mind raced. They had been observing him, meaning this wasn't a random search. They had planned this, probably tracking the boy for hours before cornering him at the creek. And now they knew exactly where he had gone. "Tell you what, Cartwright," Malachi continued, "make this easy on yourself. Hand over the boy, and we'll forget you ever interfered. Keep protecting him, and we'll assume you're choosing sides in a war you can't win." The threat lingered in the air like smoke from a branding iron. Boone had lived on this land long enough to understand that men like the Voss brothers didn't make empty promises. They would burn his house, scatter his cattle, and leave him for dead without losing sleep. But as he looked down at Ayanna, sitting small and wounded on his floor, Boone felt something harden in his chest. The same feeling he'd experienced 20 years ago when he walked away from his father's plantation rather than own another human being. Some lines couldn't be crossed, regardless of the cost. "Don't know what you're talking about," he said finally. "Haven't seen any Apache boys around here." The silence that followed was worse than any threat. Boone could sense their anger building like pressure in a steam kettle, ready to explode. "Have it your way," Malachi said, "but we'll be watching Cartwright. That boy's got to come out sometime, and when he does, we'll be ready. And anyone helping him hide is going to answer for it." The horses departed, but Boone knew they hadn't gone far. They would circle back, establishing positions to watch his house undetected. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. He turned to Ayanna, who was struggling to stand despite his wound. "Where you think you're going cannot stay," the boy said, his English careful but clear. "Bring death to your house. Death's already at my door, son. Has been since the day I decided not to bend the knee to men like Voss." Boone moved his gun rack and retrieved his rifle, checking the action with practiced hands. "Question is whether we face it standing up or on our bellies." Ayanna watched him load the weapon, and something shifted in his expression. Respect, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit. "You fight for me? I fight for what's right. Been too long since I did that." But even as Boone spoke the words, he wondered if righteousness would suffice when the shooting began. 5 men outside, possibly more coming, and all he had his wounded side. Chief Nalnish of the Red Canyon Band. I am his youngest son. The weight of that revelation struck Boone like a sledgehammer. He wasn't just harboring any Apache boy. He was protecting the son of one of the most feared war chiefs in the territory, a man whose name was whispered around campfires with the same reverence reserved for natural disasters. "Jesus," Boone breathed. "How many men does your father travel with?" "Enough." Outside, the night had gone completely silent. Even the usual sounds of crickets and night birds had stopped, as if the very air was holding its breath. Boone moved to the window and peered out, but saw nothing except darkness and shadows that could have hidden an army. "How did you get separated from them?" Ayanna's jaw tightened. "I was hunting alone. Wanted to prove myself as warrior. Saw white men stealing horses from our people. Tried to stop them." He touched his wounded side. "They had guns. I had only knife." "Those horses belonged to your people?" "Belonged to my sister's husband. Killed last winter by white soldiers." The boy's voice carried a weight of grief that seemed too heavy for someone so young. Horses were all his family had left. Boone understood now. This wasn't just about a wounded boy. This was about theft, murder, and a father who had already lost too much. Men like Chief Nalnish didn't negotiate when their children were threatened. They came with war paint and steel, ready to burn everything in their path. The sound of approaching riders made them both tense, but these weren't the same horses as before. These moved differently, quieter, like shadows given form. Boone counted at least 20 sets of hoofbeats, maybe more, surrounding his property in a wide circle. "They're here," Ayanna whispered. Through the window, Boone caught glimpses of movement in the darkness. Warriors on horseback, painted for war, moving with the deadly precision of men who had spent their lives fighting for survival. They didn't approach the house directly. Instead, they took positions in the rocks and brush, creating a perfect circle of death around anyone trapped inside. A new voice called out from the darkness, speaking in Apache. Ayanna answered, his voice stronger now, carrying across the night like a son calling to his father. The conversation was brief, but Boone didn't need to understand the words to hear the relief in both voices. Chief Nalnish appeared at the edge of the lamplight, alone and on foot. He was older than Boone had expected, maybe 50, with gray streaks in his long black hair and scars that told stories of countless battles. But his eyes burned with intensity that made Boone's skin crawl. "White man," the chief said in perfect English, "you protect my son." "I did what any decent man would do." "Decent men are rare." Nalnish stepped closer, studying Boone's face in the dim light. "You could have given him to the men who hunt him. Would have been safer for you." "Some things matter more than safe." The chief nodded slowly, as if this answer satisfied some test Boone hadn't known he was taking. "The men who shot my son, they are still here?" "5 of them, maybe more by now. They're watching the house, waiting for dawn." Something dangerous flickered in Nalnish's eyes. "Then we will not make them wait long." Boone held up his hand. "Chief, I appreciate what you're thinking, but if you attack those men on my land, every soldier in the territory will come looking for you, and they'll burn every Apache settlement they can find." Nalnish's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. The predator was still there, coiled and ready to strike, but he was listening. "You have another way, white man?" "Maybe. Depends on what those men really want." Boone looked out the darkness where he knew the Voss brothers were hiding. "They came here for your son, but they're not soldiers. They're thieves and bullies who thought they'd found easy prey. You think they will run when they see my warriors? I think they'll soil themselves and beg for mercy." Boone turned back to the chief. "But if we kill them, their deaths will be blamed on Apache raiders. More innocent people will die in the revenge that follows." Ayanna spoke up from his place by the window, his young voice cutting through the tension. "Father, this man saved my life. Listen to his words." Chief Nalnish studied his son, taking the carefully bandaged wound and the trust in the boy's eyes. When he looked back at Boone, something had changed. "What do you propose?" "We wait for dawn. Let them see exactly who they're dealing with. Give them a chance to ride away and never come back." Boone paused. "But we do it on our terms. Make them come to us. And if they choose to fight?" Boone met the chief's gaze steadily. "Then we finish it, but we give them the choice first." What happened next would have been impossible to believe if Boone hadn't seen it with his own eyes. Without a word or visible signal from their chief, the Apache warriors began to move, not retreating, but repositioning themselves with the fluid precision of a wolf pack. They spread out through the rocks and brush, creating overlapping fields of fire while remaining completely invisible to anyone watching from ground level. "Your men are well trained," Boone observed. "They are my sons and brothers. They have been fighting for their lives since they could walk." Nalnish moved to the window beside Ayanna, placing a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "How bad is his wound?" "Clean, painful, but not dangerous if we keep it that way." Boone watched the interaction between father and son, seeing a tenderness that completely contradicted the chief's fearsome reputation. "He's brave. Didn't make a sound when I cleaned it. He is young. Still thinks pain is something to be conquered instead of endured." Nalnish's voice carried the weight of hard experience. "Life will teach him otherwise." As the hours passed, Boone found himself in the strangest conversation of his life. Here he was, sitting in his own house with one of the most wanted men in the territory, talking about everything from horse breeding to the changes white settlement had brought to the land. The chief spoke with intelligence and insight that shattered every stereotype Boone had ever heard about Apache savages. "You are not what I expected," Nalnish said as the first pale hint of dawn touched the eastern horizon. "Neither are you. What did you expect?" Boone thought carefully before answering. "A killer. A man who'd cut my throat for helping his enemies. I am a killer, but I kill only those who threaten my people." The chief's eyes hardened slightly. "Your people have given me much practice." Before Boone could respond, a shout came from outside. Malachi Voss's voice, rough with cold and anger from a night spent watching an empty house. "Cartwright, sun's coming up, and our patience is running thin. Time to settle this once and for all." Nalnish smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Boone had ever seen. "Yes," the chief said quietly. "It is time." Boone stepped onto his porch as the first rays of sunlight painted the valley gold. Malachi Voss sat his horse 30 yards away, flanked by his brother Ezra and 3 other men who looked like they'd spent the night drinking courage from a bottle. Their eyes were red-rimmed and mean, the kind of desperate meanness that came from men who knew they were in over their heads but couldn't back down without losing face. "Morning, Voss," Boone called out, his rifle held casually in the crook of his arm. "You boys look tired." "Long night," Malachi snarled. "Long enough. We know that Apache boy is in there. Cartwright, this is your last chance to hand him over before we come in and get him ourselves." "That's so." Boone took a step forward, letting his boots ring against the wooden planks. "And what exactly do you plan to do with a wounded child?" "That ain't your concern." Ezra Voss spat into the dirt, his hand resting on his gun butt. "Apache killed my cousin last spring. Time for some payback." "Your cousin was gun-running to Mexican bandits," Boone said evenly. "Got himself shot trying to cheat the wrong people. Had nothing to do with Apache." The truth hit its mark. Ezra's face flushed red and his hand tightened on his weapon. But before he could draw, his brother held up a hand. "Enough talk," Malachi said. "You got 10 seconds to bring out that boy or we're coming in shooting." Boone smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Well, now that's interesting, because I was just thinking the same thing." He raised his voice, speaking clearly so every word carried across the morning air. "Chief Nalnish, I believe these gentlemen would like to meet you." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath as 5 white men slowly realized they'd walked into something far worse than they had imagined. The Apache warriors rose from the rocks and brush like ghosts taking solid form, not all at once, but in a coordinated revelation that lasted exactly 10 heartbeats. First one, then another, then groups of 3 and 4, until the entire landscape seemed alive with painted faces and steel weapons. 40 warriors, maybe more, every one of them painted for war. Every one of them armed with rifles that had been taken from soldiers who no longer needed them. They didn't move or speak. They simply existed, like death itself made manifest in the morning light. Malachi Voss went white as paper. His horse sensed his fear and began to prance nervously, adding to the chaos building in the man's mind. Beside him, Ezra was counting under his breath, his voice getting higher with each number. "Jesus Christ," one of the other men whispered. "Jesus Christ Almighty." Chief Nalnish stepped out of Boone's house, moving with the fluid grace of a man who had spent his life in the saddle and on the hunt. He wore traditional Apache clothing decorated with silver and turquoise, but the rifle in his hands was modern and well-maintained. When he spoke, his voice carried the absolute authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "You hunt my son like an animal," he said simply. "Shoot him when he tries to recover what was stolen from his family. Now you come to this good man's home with threats and violence." The chief's eyes moved from one mounted man to the next, cataloging faces and weapons with the practiced assessment of a predator selecting prey. "I am curious," Nalnish continued. "What did you plan to do with my boy once you caught him?" Malachi Voss tried to speak, but only a strangled croak came out. His brother Ezra was openly shaking now, his horse dancing sideways as it felt its rider's terror. The three other men looked like they were seriously considering abandoning their horses and running on foot. "I asked you a question," Chief Nalnish said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. "What were your plans for my son?" We just wanted—" Malachi finally found his voice, but it came out high and thin. "Justice for what his people done to ours." "Justice." The chief repeated the word like he was tasting something bitter. "You steal our horses. Shoot my boy when he tries to stop you. Chase him onto this man's land with guns and rope." He paused, letting the implication sink in. "This is your justice?" Boone watched the confrontation unfold, marveling at how completely the tables had turned. 12 hours ago, these 5 men had felt comfortable threatening him in his own home. Now they sat surrounded by enough firepower to wipe out a small town. He spurred his horse into a desperate gallop, heading for what looked like open ground between the Apache positions. He made it exactly 50 yards before 3 arrows sprouted from his back like deadly flowers. He tumbled from his saddle and lay still in the dust. The remaining 4 men stared at their companion's body, the reality of their situation finally sinking in. They were surrounded by professional killers who could drop them all before they could clear leather. "Anyone else feeling like a ride?" Boone asked conversationally. Malachi Voss was sweating despite the cool morning air. "What do you want? Money?" "We got money. I want my horses returned," Chief Nalnish said simply. "The ones you stole from my daughter's family." "We don't have them anymore," Ezra said quickly. "Sold them in Tucson 3 days ago." "Then you'll get them back today." "That's impossible. They could be anywhere by now." "Then you will find them, and you will return them along with compensation for the pain you caused my son and the trouble you brought to my friend here." The chief's eyes flicked to Boone. 50 head of cattle should cover the debt. 50 head. Malachi exploded. "That's highway robbery." Chief Nalnish smiled, and every warrior within sight shifted slightly, fingers moving closer to triggers. "No," the chief said softly. "Highway robbery is what you did to my people. This is justice." The standoff stretched like a bowstring, ready to snap. Boone could see the calculations running through Malachi's mind, weighing greed against survival. The man was a bully and a thief, but he wasn't completely stupid. "And if we do this," Malachi said finally, "if we get your horses back and pay the cattle, what then?" "Then you leave this territory and never return. You find somewhere else to practice your particular brand of justice." The chief's voice hardened. "Because if I see any of you again, I will assume you have come back to finish what you started here today. You can't just run us off our own land." "Your land?" Nalnish laughed, but there was no humor in it. "This was Apache land when your grandfathers were still learning to walk. We are simply renegotiating the lease terms." Ayana appeared in the doorway behind his father, still pale from his wound but standing straight and proud. When he spoke, his young voice carried clearly across the yard. "Father, let me tell them what happens to horse thieves in the old ways." Chief Nalnish held up a hand, silencing his son with a gentle but firm gesture. "No need for old ways today, my son. These men understand their situation clearly enough." Malachi Voss looked at the boy, then back at the chief, and something finally broke inside him. The fight went out of his shoulders like air from a punctured bladder. "How long do we have?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. 7 days to return the horses. 14 days to deliver the cattle to the place I will show you." Nalnish pointed toward a distant ridge. "There's a box canyon beyond those rocks. You will leave them there and ride away. No tricks, no attempt to follow my people back to our camp. And if we can't find all the horses, then you will replace them with animals of equal value. My son will help you identify what is acceptable." The chief's smile was sharp as broken glass. He has become quite expert at judging horseflesh since yesterday. Ezra Voss finally found his voice. "What about Clarence?" He gestured toward their dead companion. "Buzzards need to eat too," Boone said flatly. "But I suppose you can take him with you if you've got strong stomachs and weak noses." The 3 surviving men dismounted and awkwardly loaded their companion's body across a saddle. The process took several minutes, during which 40 Apache warriors watched them with the patient intensity of cats watching mice. No one spoke. No one needed to. When they were mounted again, Chief Nalnish stepped forward. One more thing. The man who protected my son. He looked directly at Boon. You will not be bothered by these men, or their friends again. Ever. This I promise you. Malachi started to object, but the chief's raised hand stopped him cold. You have a choice. Accept my protection of this man as part of our agreement, or we can settle this matter in the traditional way right now. The horse thieves looked around at the circle of warriors, at the arrows already nocked and the rifles already aimed, and made the only choice available to reasonable men who wanted to see another sunset. We accept, Malachi said through gritted teeth. Good. Now go. You have much work to do and very little time to do it. The 4 men rode away without another word, leading a horse that carried their dead friend. They moved slowly, like men carrying a great weight that had nothing to do with the body draped across the extra saddle. Boon watched them disappear over the ridge, then turned to find Chief Nalnish, studying him with curious eyes. Why? The chief asked simply. Why what? Why risk everything for a boy you had never seen before? Boon thought about it for a long moment, watching Ayanna lean against the doorframe. Young, but somehow older than he'd been yesterday morning. Because somebody